My name is Chris Demrick. I am a ACD board member, and it's my pleasure to be introducing this panel here this morning. So, we have 4 wonderful people and an amazing facilitator here. I'm going to say a couple words about them. Before I jump into that, I also want to remind y'all to share on your social media some of your responses both to the previous question, thoughts on this panel, and the other activities. We have a hashtag Ways, and we are definitely going to appreciate seeing y'all using it on all forms of social media. So, as I mentioned, my name is Chris. I use he, him pronouns. I am the facilitator of the Collaborative Design Workshop, a design justice, education, advocacy, and research practice in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I've been a part of the ACD board for like 2 years-ish, but coming to conferences for many years where I've had the opportunity to meet a few of these wonderful folks. One of them is Alan Coe, who is our facilitator. Alan is with Hester Street out of New York, working in the city, the Hudson Valley, and they're also doing some more work around the country as well. He's a longtime part of the ACD community too. We have next up Christine Gaspar, who is a longtime leader of CUP, the Center for Urban Pedagogy in New York City. Y'all may be familiar with their amazing, beautiful pamphlets and policy storytelling work. But also, as I've learned, Christine was previously in Mississippi doing work with the Gulf Coast Community Design Center down in my area. We have next Adam Rosa, who is with Collabo, which is a Chicago-based planning practice that does a lot of really cool engagement work with communities across the country. And Durell Coleman, who is with DC Design. It's a design thinking for social impact practice. And Durell's a recently, he's been working around the country for quite a while and recently relocated to Austin, Texas, which is also where I grew up. So really cool to learn more. And he grew up in Texas as well, so cool to learn more about those connections. And last, we have Jae Shin, who is a proud resident of Newark, New Jersey, and a co-leader of the urban design practice Hector, which works in Newark, the region, and around the country. So I'm going to turn it over to Alan.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to start by saying I'm super nervous. I start every conversation like this super nervous, and I want to disabuse everyone of the idea that I know what I'm doing. On Wednesday, I may have Googled, no, I did Google how to moderate a panel. There was a lot of information. So we're just gonna try it. I'm actually just here to tell funny stories and some dad jokes along the way, and hopefully we'll get through it. The first question I wanna ask is actually something, I'm gonna just go right down the line for this first one. And I'm going to couple this first question with a story about each of you. The ACD fellows, when I was looking at their bios, I haven't met any of you yet. Please introduce yourself. They're asked to answer the question, what was your aha moment? Aha, when you thought it might be more fulfilling or you decided to pursue a community-driven career. We're just going to go right down the line for this first one, and then we'll change it up. Christine, here's my story about you.
You didn't tell us about this.
No, I didn't. When we were planning this, I reached out to Christine, and she said, oh yeah, I'm in Italy right now. I'm like, okay, cool. We'll connect when you're back. Later, someone told me, it's just like, yeah, her and her partner, this person, who might be famous, went to go celebrate with these other people who might be famous. And people named me these names. I'm like, I don't know who those people are. I know who Christine is, and she's the most famous person on that list of names. So, cool, Italy. Christine. All of that is true.
It is all true, it's true. That's hilarious. Thanks, Alan. What was my aha moment? I think I actually think I came from doing community-oriented work before I got into design, and then I had to sort of pivot away from it to do architecture school, and then practice architecture for a little while. So I think for me it was trying to figure out how to get back to that and to get back to what I would say is myself. But I was working for a small firm in Boston doing, architectural design work, and, really enjoying like learning about it and learning the details. And I really liked working with our clients and like learning how to manage projects and manage those relationships. But I was also, it was a hard job and it was frustrating. And I remember there was this day where I spent like 3 hours on the phone with someone because the like $500 German towel bars for someone's powder room were like stuck in a port somewhere. Yeah. And I was just like, I had such a bad day and it was dumb. And like I got home and I was watching the news and like it was August 2005 and Katrina had just hit the Gulf Coast. And, this was like afterwards when like New Orleans started flooding after, and it was just like these images of people like on a bridge, right? People trying to survive like on this bridge. And I was just like, I'm working on the wrong built environment problems. And so I was like, okay, I gotta get out of this. And then shortly thereafter was Structures for Inclusion. That year was held in San Francisco. And I was like, this looks like people who are talking about things I care about. And so I managed to get out to it and met like so many of the people who've become like peers and mentors and the folks who I think have helped me in my work and I think are shaping the field in many ways. But the thing that was actually really cool about it too is that SFI, like, there were all these different people presenting who were practicing kind of community-oriented work in different ways, like some in conventional practices and some were in nonprofits. And I just got to see all these models of it, and it really opened up the possibilities for me. And then I also met David Perks, who was just starting in the Gulf Coast Community Design Studio, and then I moved to Biloxi and worked for him a few months later.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. Christine, I forgot I should have introduced what we were doing here. But no, you set it up really well, because I wanted to convene essentially people I consider friends, right? And who I also admire, in a conversation around like pathways to, I think, an unconventional career path, an unconventional career arc. I think that when we're in various forms of the design school, there is this idea in the popular imagination of like what an architect is or what a planner is. I think I know I personally, I still introduce myself as an architect. With a caveat, I say, I'm probably stretching your idea of what an architecture is and does, but that's a you problem. It's not my problem. My story about Adam is actually when I was going through a similar, your story was not embarrassing, and this one isn't either, but when I was going through a similar like questioning period about like how I could shape my career, I turned to Adam and said, how did you do it? Because I met Adam, 2021. The pandemic's a weird time. I don't know where everything hits. Something like that. And I think you were saying you had just hired your first person, your first employee, which I think if anyone has gone through that journey, it's like nerve-wracking to have to like essentially guarantee a livelihood to someone else. I did not start my own organization yet. Or maybe I never will, but that was a huge touchstone for me to just hear how you did it, hear what you were thinking about. So still grateful. What was your aha moment?
Thank you for that introduction, that story. That's wonderful. I'm also really curious about who Christine is hanging out with, all these famous people, so we're gonna have to ask her about that later. But I think my aha moment, I began my career on the West Coast in San Francisco, and I was working for a urban design architecture firm. And one day they came in and they said, we just got this project in Hawaii, and who wants to go? And I was immediately, obviously, like I want to go to Hawaii and do some work. And so I had a chance to go to Oahu and spend several years working with communities kind of on the western side of the island in areas. One of the neighborhoods is called Waipahu, the other is Pearl City, Aiea. And as somebody who grew up in Buffalo, New York, which is about the furthest place from Hawaii you could culturally or climate-wise or anything, it was a different experience. And I think that what I learned from working in those communities on the western part of the island, now this is not Waikiki or what you see on the postcards. These are, underserved communities, very diverse. There's a long history and culture related to going back to the ancient Hawaiians through the plantation history of that part of the island. And so coming in as an outsider, really trying to work with folks and connect with them, I learned some really valuable things about really the fact that trust really moves at the process moves at the speed of trust. And in Hawaii, that speed is slow. You spend the first 45 minutes of any meeting just talking story, just catching up with people. How's your family? Chit-chatting about the food. And that was different for me, never having worked in those environments before. And so those particular projects were more physically oriented. They were around transit-oriented development. But it was really the connection to the people that I enjoyed the most, being able to work in an area where I had to learn the culture, and I had to kind of understand how to communicate with people, and that led me to really be more interested in essentially people-oriented planning work, and planning work that was really sensitive to the local place. So that was kind of my aha moment. I had many others throughout the years following, but that was the first time where I really thought, well, I want to do planning differently. I want to do design work differently. And I want it to be really focused on connection with people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't know you were from New York. And also, I love something that you said about building community and telling story. People in the audience know I love stories. All I want to do is tell them and hear them, and that's what we're here to do. So thank you for that. Something about Durell, well, two things. Durell, at one point in his life, was an Olympic caliber hurdler. Is that wild? Right? And the last time I saw him, he was in my car scarfing down Chinese food on our way to the Rockaways. Because when you're in New York, you gotta hustle, and we had to do a community engagement down in, the Rockaways is pretty much a different state, I'll be honest. Your turn.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Alan. Hi, everyone. It's great to meet you. I'm going to give my aha in a couple parts, maybe. So my first aha came when I was a kid. I knew I wanted to be an inventor. My mom asked me that when I was 8 years old, and I said, I'm going to be an inventor. She said, how are you going to make money? I said, I'm going to have my own company one day that makes things and sells them. I had visions of being on Oprah and winning awards and no idea what I was going to make. Unfortunately, the next year, my older brother was diagnosed with cancer. And for 5 years, he fought this disease, which was terrible. So into remission and out of remission, chemotherapy, et cetera. But I had this really stark experience during that time, going from cancer wards with parents who are grappling with the loss of their child, or meeting doctors who didn't know how to cure a disease for a 17-year-old. And then going to my middle school, middle class town, where we were told, grown-ups have it figured out. It'll make sense for you when you're older. And I was seeing these realities where I was like, I don't think so. I don't think that's true. And so after he passed away, I came out with this desire saying, I'm going to create things that improve quality of life for people who are forgotten. And that sort of began one big element of it. But the second part of it, the story was, I was asked this question in high school. People would get upset when I said I was going to be an inventor. They'd be like, that's not a career. That's not like a job. And one kid said, how are you just going to become Thomas Edison? And I was like, how do you become Thomas Edison? That's a good question. And so I went forward. I went off to college. I was able to study this design thinking methodology. I remember designing this wind turbine at one point, and it was like, I'm going to generate power for people in countries who don't have access to electricity. And after I finished it, I was like, I have no idea if anyone wants this at all. And I began this process of really going out, went to Nicaragua, lived with the family for a long time. But it was the core experience for me that was like, oh, to answer big questions, to solve big problems, to invent new things, to create things anyone wants, you actually have to talk to the people who are going through it. And so that became my double aha moment, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, we can get into that a little bit more because there's so many questions. Jae. Hi. I love you. Jae and I've known Jae for the longest, almost a decade. And the story I want to share with Jae, she's a proud Jersey girl. I asked her if she was from New York. She said no. My daughter's also a Jersey girl. And when my husband and I brought her home from our adoption finalization, it was in Newark, New Jersey. We went to court. And I just texted Jae. I'm just like, hey, we went through this thing. It was really emotional. It's like, you want to hang out? She said, yes, let's get egg tarts. And I said, yes. So we went to a Portuguese bakery and got egg tarts. Since then, my husband, my daughter, and I went to Portugal, and we literally had 30 egg tarts. I'm a really good eater, and so is my kid, who's also a Jersey girl.
And I love you too. I studied painting, and I spent about 10 years in New York making art. And that's where I also saw parts of Brooklyn change rapidly, and also met people whose work, whether it was an artist like Martha Rosler, or old school people at Cup, or old school people at Hester Street, these young people in their 20s really trying to make sense of what was going on in their own world. And so I said, yeah, no, I like my art, but I think it's also, architecture would be a good way to sort of do or be closer to what it is that they're investigating. So I went to school for architecture, and I've been in this field since then. So, but this question about aha moment, when Alan said it to me, I was like, what is the utility of such a question? Like it is helpful to have narratives that allows you to be self-reflective, but also, for me, it always takes back turn and goes into self-legitimizing, which then kind of reminded me that for all my students, I also teach architecture and urbanism to graduate students. One of the pieces of reading that I make them do is Theory as Liberatory Practice by Bell Hooks. And there she says, theory is a simple way of making sense of the world. Theory is therefore, it starts from a location of healing, and that your theoretical practice is not, necessarily inherently liberatory or, revolutionary. You kind of have to make your theory to do that work through your everyday practice, which then made me think about, oh yeah, I mean, that's a good narrative arc that I can, incorporate and sort of talk about. So, in my day-to-day practice, I ask, what is the width of the sidewalk that we're designing, and what is the pattern that I want to use here? But at the same time, I have to also ask, well, what is the regulatory framework that would make these kinds of paving, replicable? Is anyone going to ever sue us because of the maintenance issues? If so, how do we build a community that would allow for sustained maintenance of this paving? How do we convince people that, no, don't just put asphalt, that would be not good? Like how do I go to that meeting and be convincing to, government workers? So it's just a sort of plethora of day-to-day practice that sort of brings your theorizing into motion, And so I guess I'm answering that question about aha moment as sort of, I think it's a continuous thing, and that sort of unfolds in your practice.
Yeah, no, that's really great, and thank you for that answer. I was recently having a conversation with a group of people. I was trying, my partner and I were trying to, Annie Ledbury, if everybody knows her, we were trying to create or explain a different type of practice where we're essentially saying the end goal is actually to build the network and like to build this community ecosystem, or rather to cultivate it, because those systems probably are already there and you're just a visitor, right? And what you realize through that practice is that like you're saying, maybe the aha moment is actually a process. And I actually think what's interesting and frustrating about like this, our career paths, is that because it's a process, we're always having to reconcile these pulls into more traditional practice, or these intersections into more traditional practices or frameworks. Adam, I'm looking at you because I feel like this speaks a lot to your specific career path, where you launched Collabo from what might be considered a more traditional practice. How do we all deal with the constant pull to come back? I mean, I often see jobs just like, oh, we'll pay you all this money to do this relatively simple thing that's straightforward. But that's not exciting, that's not compelling. Tell me the answer.
Oh, man. Well, I think you just have to have a love and a passion for this work, and know that you would be doing it even if you weren't getting paid for it as a job. And I think most of the people in this room probably feel that way. But I do think that we constantly run up against more traditional approaches. I spent 8 or 9 years working for a firm that had been founded in the 1970s. And they had their way of doing things based on kind of old school methodologies, and it was very successful over the years. But at a certain point, it's like you have to evolve with what's going on in the world, and our approaches and processes definitely have to evolve, or else we don't reach people in a meaningful way. And so I made the decision to start my practice in early 2020. I launched it March of 2020, which obviously is like an incredibly weird time to be starting something new, but it also felt like the right time because it was the great reset for us all in the way we work and in what we do. But really, I wanted to take what I had learned from many years and many decades of working in different communities all around the country, and to try to kind of codify that into a new approach for a planning practice that goes beyond traditional engagement and really reaches into community empowerment and goes beyond traditional planning into action. And so that is a little unorthodox. We try to do things like set aside a good portion of every budget to give back to the communities in which we serve. You couldn't do that at a larger practice. Good luck, trying to convince a principal at a larger firm to do that. But having the flexibility to be very nimble and really trying to kind of lean into a lot of the lessons that were taught to me through my work in all of these interesting and unique communities. So I feel like it happens naturally, but you also have to be very intentional in your moves. You can't just wait for things to happen to you. I mean, the story that we were speaking about earlier, I was talking to Ellen, I was saying that this is the best time to start something new. You have to be encouraging people to really make that leap.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect answer. One of the things that I forgot to mention was that I really wanted to convene like this conversation because I feel like oftentimes emerging voices or emerging professionals don't necessarily see like that pathway. And it's really important to see people who are constantly working at it and constantly facing these choices because they are choices, right, that we all have to make. Before I get into my question, about choices. I actually want Thomas Edison, Durell, to comment. You look just like him. About, you're just kind of like, I don't want to diminish it, right? But you're just kind of figuring it out as you go along. Like there was that point when you wanted, like, I think you told me you were literally making things like with a laser cutter and like selling those things. And I think that like, especially with the physical moves that you and your family have made, it might be easier to like go into a traditional practice and just, we know as fathers, right? Sometimes it's just easier to not have to worry about work when you're trying to help someone live, right? What are your thoughts?
Thomas Edison. One of the things I think is really important for this, because I want to get really practical here too, is that you know what brings you joy in life and what makes you angry. I have this concept, which is basically this idea of having a life mission statement, setting a North Star for your life. And the answer to that question, what brings you joy, what makes you angry, leads to this theory, which is that you should be living a life that tries to maximize that joy and minimize that anger. But the way to minimize the anger in my life has been to do something about the things that bother me. When I work in traditional practice for the 3 months in my life that I've done that, literally, I feel like my soul is leaking from my body and dragging on the floor behind me. This is not the way I want to use my existence. And it might be because I had such a strong experience as a child, right? Where I was like, this is formative at 14, right? But that's my North Star, right? That's my guiding light, is to say, like, I want to be the catalyst for the realization of ambition. I want to help people achieve their greatness. Nothing brings me more joy in life than to see people do things they didn't think they could do, and overcome those barriers to become who they actually wanted to be. They didn't know, right? Or they didn't know how to get there. Backing up into the pull, though, and the push, the practical piece of it is we all have to survive at the same time. And so I think as you answer the first question of like, this is what my life mission statement is, the other question becomes, well, what are the ways in which I could fulfill that mission, right? I've been a tutor. I was a tutor for 5 years while starting my company. I didn't pay myself for 5 years while I hired my team. I paid everyone more than me, so I could run this company, so I could build something that actually makes a difference in the world. But that was driven by that deep passion, the knowledge that I didn't have any other options. My soul can't leak on the ground the whole time, so better figure this out. But I think that's been the push and pull. I think practically speaking, you do have commitments and obligations, and you have families to take care of, and you have all these other pieces. So the question becomes, where can I go where I can live more of this mission? If you know what it is, what is it, right? Ask yourself that. And then also, are you willing to start it if it doesn't exist? And the answer might be no. It's perfectly okay. But knowing the answer helps you either index into saying, I'm going to create something that doesn't exist, and I'm going to slog it out to figure it out till it becomes profitable and meets those requirements, or I'm going to optimize within the structures that exist right now around what I care about most.
Thank you. And that actually just made me think. I lost train of thought. But what I want to say is, like, as you're making these choices, right, like, or on the practical side, right, we're going to talk about the practical side of this. Like, you physically moved to New Haven, and after 4 years, you physically moved to Austin, right? And a lot of that had to do with the fact that you were a very supportive partner for your wife, who is a doctor, right? That is a huge move where you're balancing professional and personal decisions against, like, this North Star that you're talking about. Obviously, you didn't take that lightly. Can you walk us through that, what you were thinking? And from a business development standpoint, how do you essentially move something that is so community-based to a completely different community? How are you hustling now?
Yeah. For me, I think about, I said, like, I wanted to be this inventor. I wanted to have this company. I wanted to create things that matter for people who are forgotten in the system. And so then the question became, well, how do I do that? Knowing my wife is, it was like senior year of college. She was like, I'm going to be a doctor. And I was like, you're an urban studies major, right? So I was like, okay. So looking ahead to the future, I was like, all right, so she's going to go to med school somewhere. She's going to go to residency somewhere. This is the person I want to be with for the rest of my life. So that was part of my design criteria, was how do I build something that lets me go, that I can run from anywhere? And so we were remote from 2014. We were remote from the moment we were started, right? There were a number of decisions like that were made. I was running a laser cutting and engraving business as like part of this convoluted story of how you get to running a social impact consulting firm. And I was like, well, this is not mobile. So that was part of the calculation to move on to something else. It also wasn't making the level of impact that I wanted. And so I do think there's a few factors in here. One is, can you develop, if that passion that you have is really strong, like, can you lean into that and develop a trust that you're supposed to do that, that you can do that, right? And I got there. I was like, I can do this. Second was, can you trust your ability to iterate through and keep finding new ways to do it, right? When you get that North Star, there's a lot of ways to live that out. When I was tutoring, even though I was tutoring these kids, I got to mentor people and help them become their best selves. Like I switched from being like, how do I do this math problem, to being like, why do you want that career versus that career, right? Why do you think that your accomplishments are who you really are, right? So there's all these ways to live it out, I guess, and there's a few factors just in terms of like you having belief, having faith, taking that leap, that you can make it happen. When I moved to New Haven, it was a huge jump. All of our clients were in California. No one was anywhere else. And I had one employee in California and made this leap. And then I was like, you got to figure it out. And so I started connecting with people, and I met the executive director, Betsy, of Hester Street at the time. And that's what actually introduced me to Alan. But it was like, because I was following what I was supposed to be following, the path, I trusted that the path would materialize in front of me.
Yeah, I recently had a conversation where you don't know all the answers, but eventually if everyone believes that you can do it, you have to believe in yourself that you can do it. Yeah. And to Jay's point about self-legitimizing, it's just like, I need to figure this out, and I need to believe in that I can. What you spoke about a little bit was, we all make choices, I like to say, and then we have to live with them or die with them. And Christine, you've had to make a lot of choices, right? When you were an ED, you have to make choices every day. And then you made the choice, and this was earth-shattering, the New York City ecosphere, right? To leave Center of Urban Pedagogy, which you led for 13 years, right? I've never done anything for 13 years. I mean, I guess my relationship is more than 13 years old, but that's the single thing. Can you tell us a little about how you made those choices and how you continue to make these choices?
Oh, jeez.
I stuck you with the big one.
I was just real tired.
We're all really tired.
Yeah. It's so interesting hearing everyone share these stories and like resonating with experiences that I've had. But I think when I came to CUP, I had never wanted to be the head of something like what you said before. I was afraid to like be responsible for other people's livelihoods. I had been like an assistant director before that. That's a really nice job to have. But it was this really exciting opportunity, and it just really aligned with things that I believed and cared about. And as we grew over time, it was just really interesting to be in this space where it was like, I literally never went to work and felt like I knew how to do my job. It's a great feeling. It's exhilarating, right? Because you're just like learning all the time, but it's also super exhausting. But we were just like always a different organization as we grew. And it was like every time I sort of figured out some system, I would realize like, I'd like cleared this level, and I'd be like, oh shit, there's more stuff up here now. Okay. But that was cool, and like over time, I had this like amazing network of other like EDs that I just really I felt so supported by and in community with, and also that like we got through COVID together for sure. Would not have survived that without each other. So I don't know. It was just like it was an exciting place to be, and I obviously had so much hand in how we grew and what my job became. So it was really hard to let it go. I think, for a long time I thought about when I should leave, and I couldn't imagine wanting to leave. But I got to that point where I was just like, it's someone else's turn to run this and make it be the next thing it's going to be. Like, I think I've done what I can do here, and I think I'm ready to do another thing. But I also don't know what that is yet. And so it's sort of, again, what you just said, Durell, like, it was a little bit like, I just have the confidence that, like, I'm going to find it. And I was just talking to another friend who's in mid-career and shifting her job, and she's like, I'm crying at my desk because I'm so panicked that I'm about to leave my job. And I was like, we're planting seeds, but we can't see what they are yet, but we got to believe that they're gonna take root. So
right. What you're saying really resonates with me, because I think about like times when we have to make these hard choices, and I think maybe people here, maybe I'm like going through these choices now, and I think, yeah, you're planting seeds. And I think it's also really important to recognize things like this, and also our personal networks that are really there to support and to reinforce that belief, right? Like, who's going to believe in me when I don't believe in myself? And I think, yeah, it's hard. I almost trust those networks more than I trust myself sometimes. And I don't know if this is a pivot, but like one thing that I think about with this conference, the first and only other time I came to this conference was in Dallas in 2017. And I remember meeting some OGs and just being in complete admiration, like Teresa Huang, Jess Zimbabwe, Dan Terra. Can you talk a little bit about like your networks and who you have admired through your careers? Perhaps why? Like whether that's just from afar, through partnership. And also, I know that I'm going through this now in real time. You realize that the people you've admired at some point become your peers, right? And I think that's more of that's a me problem, right? That's a you problem. It's, everyone you speak to in this work is so generous, right? Like that is a common denominator. And I think that they're always ready to welcome you, but you perhaps don't have that feeling. There's that imposter syndrome. Who have you admired? And like, what was that moment like for you, Jae?
Hey, okay. Yeah, well, within the design field, I have an enormous admiration for Liza Fior of MUF. It's an architecture and landscape office based in London. And the reason I admire their work is that they have a real investigative approach to designing. Really understanding what they design, ends up being in a situation of connected systems and social relations. They have an incredible humor about what they make, and the forms are fun and beautiful. And I think another thing is, I think landscape designers or urban designers have a difficult time sort of really playing with scales that stretch from the scale of a neighborhood all the way to your body. And I think they're just masterful at, considering all the different scales of their practice. So that's one person. Another person that I admire outside of my field is Dr. Mindy Fullilove. She's a social psychiatrist who studies the relationship between built environment and issues of public health. I highly recommend her work to those who are just getting into the field of planning or just curious about built environment. If you haven't seen it, the really good book is called Root Shock. And finally, I think I am a for-profit group. We have clients that pay our bills, speaking of surviving. And so a lot of times we have to make sure that we have the right clients to make my life easy and make my work meaningful. And what I have found in terms of that work is that you just have to work for people that you admire. So the best clients that we have at Hector are community organizers. I think one of the mantras that we have is that our projects lives within an organized community. That rather than sort of like bringing, here's our project, we'll bring it to you, community. We are becoming sort of part of designers who are called into existing set of organizing. So the organizers, community organizers, inspire me. All the way to, the keynote speaker talked about, freedom school, the tradition of freedom schools, like people like Dr. Clark, all the way to my current colleague, Alfonso Espino of GES Coalition and Tierra Collective CLT out in Denver. What they have talent in, the community organizers, they can really sort of take the issues of the physical and civic, like where do roads come from, or how do we build a sidewalk, into the issues of a shared understanding of democracy. I think that talent in community organizers is something that I admire and love working with a lot.
Yeah, and that is in some ways like thankless work, right? And it's a talent that it's real. Like I just look at people who are able to organize community like that, and it just looks exhausting to me. Maybe that's a me problem. Maybe I'm just exhausted all the time. Does anybody want to add to that, to add to Jae's answer? I do wonder, and I'm just going to say your name, doesn't mean you have to answer it. Christine, I have admired you and your work at CUP for so long. And who have you admired?
Thank you for saying that. Gosh, so many people. I feel like I really came into community engaged design in sort of like this peer group that I found at that Structures for Inclusion, and they included some folks you mentioned, Just Zimbabwe, Liz Ogbu, Teresa Huang, some of those folks who I think we have pushed each other. And I think what's important in spaces like this that are still kind of alternative spaces where you're the thing we want doesn't exist, what is it? You have to have people where you're constantly having that conversation with, right? Of what is it? What could it be? What should it be? Where are we wrong? And that where are we wrong part, I felt like there was not space in the conversation when we first started coming into the field for that. And so I think we found each other in a way around that of this part doesn't feel right to me. How do we understand that together? So I feel like that has been so important to me, and I've just admired them and the opportunity to be in those conversations for a long time. But I think a few folks also outside of maybe the built environment space too have been really important to me. Another ED of a New York organization who also left her job last year, Kemi Elesanmi, who was running the Laundromat Project, is a dear, dear friend, and I think she has also helped me in so many ways, and I think we've helped each other in our thinking about our work. And then actually here in Chicago, George A. at Greater Good Studio, I've learned so much from him, and I really appreciate the work that he's doing around thinking about design ethics and pushing us past this idea of empathy is the framework, but no, how do we have accountability and ethics in this work? I think there's a lot of really amazing thought going on there right now. And Mari Nakano, who's based in New York, I think also has been a thought leader in that space. I don't know, there's just so many people, but to me, one of the places that's been super, super important to me has been Design Futures Forum, which is, I think, a space where we met.
Yeah,
actually.
Where I accosted you with my hug.
It was sweet, I like that. It's like ACD, right? It's a space for this kind of thinking, and it's for folks who are still in school. And I really love that space because it's inherently a multi-generational space. And so there are people that come as the faculty, and some are faculty at universities, and some are leading workshops, and then there are the students, and then former students who are now alumni come back and lead workshops. And I just feel it's this question of when do people become your peers? I just feel when I go to Design Futures, everyone there is a peer because we're all in this conversation together, even if it's for the first time.
Yeah, no, and to that point, for me, Design Futures this year in Eugene was a really big turning point where I started, where I realized I was sharing information. I was the one who was giving information to people who were consuming it. And that sort of sparked the idea behind this panel, because I wondered, and this is for all of you, Like, do you ever get over this imposter syndrome where you're just like, you just feel like you don't know what you're doing, or you finally feel like you do know what you're doing, to essentially a field that's constantly changing, right? It takes a big leap of faith to start your own organization, right? And multiple people here have done that. I just actually want to open it up to anyone. When do you get over feeling like a big faker?
Like, I want to say something to that because, I mean, I struggle with this also. Like I was just saying, I felt like I never knew how to do my job. But I also feel like imposter syndrome, right, is like, because I love how you keep saying, is it a me problem? And I just, like, I'm not the first person to say this, but imposter syndrome is often not a me problem, right? Because, like, many of us are people who have been told repeatedly that we should not be doing the thing that we're doing, right? And guess what? You believe that, right?
100%.
Right? And so it's hard to then, like, counter that. And, like, it's interesting. I want to say that because I think it means, like, the solution to that isn't necessarily just me work, right?
Right.
But no, I never get over it.
And that's fine, right?
I think maybe it's more, I don't know, two things right now about imposter syndrome. One, I think everyone's dealing with the question, I don't think anyone knows what they're doing. So I think it's helpful. Like, we're all in this room, like let's zoom out for a second. We're all in this room, we're all trying to figure out how to create change in the world. We're all living in a country where the wealth gap has been the same for the last 50 to 70 years. Like, there's a number of things that we're working on addressing, and we're all trying to figure out how to do it. And so that's helpful to know that reality, right? I don't think anyone has it all figured out. We all have fragments of it, and I think that's what's powerful about community design, community-centered design, is the idea that we can come together and bring multiple voices in. I think the other, though, is what's been really helpful for me has been when I do question, do I fit? Am I the right one? Do I know this the right way? I think about what's my role? What's my place in this ecosystem? There are lots of, for example, Black people in America who have different experiences. Despite what we may paint in media at times, we all have different backgrounds and different lived experience. I've come to recognize, for example, that my role is as a bridge. I'm a bridge between generations. I have family members directly descended from who grew up in Section 8 housing, who are very familiar with government programs, who have faced direct challenges around community violence. I am a generation removed from that reality, and I grew up in this middle-class town that I told you all about, right? But I have my childhood experiences going back to my grandmother's home, right? Or spending time in community where I gain more and more experience over time in those spaces. And I've also met the Surgeon General of the United States, right? Or the Secretary of State, or whoever it might be. There are rooms that I'm in on the far side that I'm like, no one in my family's ever been here before. This is the first time. And then there are rooms that I'm at on the other side where it's like, this is not my everyday lived experience, but I'm very close to the people for whom it was. And so what's my role? My role is not to speak for the people that I'm not. My role is to be a bridge in that space. And I can do that very well because I understand how to translate between. So I think that's a question we can all ask as well when we're feeling like imposters. Is like, what is my role? What is my privilege? What is the unique thing that I can do that maybe very few other people can do because I am different than other people? That gives me a lot of power and confidence in moving through whatever space I happen to move into.
Thank you. Adam, you look like you want to say something?
I could say something pretty quickly. So a great majority of the work that we do is in and around public housing communities all across the country. And so really the approach to coming into a community where you're an outsider and listening and learning first and being really very empathetic and getting to know people as real people is the only way that we ever really have any successes in terms of bigger ideas of how do we improve the neighborhood and improve people's lives. But it often presents me with an imposter syndrome, and really anywhere that I go. And so what I've learned is that the folks that live in these communities, especially the community leaders and the activists that we talked about, they're just some of the most incredible people. They're the most resilient people. And it really kind of opened my eyes to what equity is really all about. Because if they would have been given the same chances that some of us on stage would have been given today or in the past, they would be here and we would be there. And so it's just, it's really humbling to work with these folks and to really try to break bread with them in a way that is meaningful, but it is a challenge depending on where you're coming from, and to really try to come into a new environment like that. And I never present myself as an expert in anything, and nor should I don't think any of us should. When we're working in community development, we're a resource, and so I think that's the approach that I like to take.
Absolutely, I appreciate the reframing of that and really what you've all added. I'm mindful of time, even though I have no idea how long we've been here or how much time I have left. But I do want to leave some time for audience questions. I will ask my last question, and it's just really general, but what advice do you have for anyone who's perhaps pivoting into this work or who is getting their first job and is really interested in a pathway that is still nebulous and undefined? What can you add to that conversation? Anyone? I will pick on someone. Jay.
Well, I think one of the things that I would say is remember, do-gooderism is not enough. I mean, what I mean by that is closely linked to some of the struggles that I face personally as we lead our practice. A lot of times we try to not take just sort of like the engagement portion of an entire design and build project, and that we need to have a fuller scope of work into the integrated into a fuller scope of work. With the larger engagement turn, quote unquote, in the industry that's happened, we get a lot of calls and from big firms and say, hey, we have this amazing museum that we're going to build. We want you to be on our team and be the engager. And I think, of course, there are colleagues of mine whose work I admire and who does amazing work in that kind of, industrial space. If you are a designer and you love designing, do-gooderism isn't going to be enough. Figure out how the system of building and talking to people like they're real people intersect with your practice of design. So, whether that is really trying to not sort of carve out a small room in this field of design that I am a specialized designer that is community-centered, let go of those labels and be more on the sort of the spectrum of the kinds of folks who are sort of identifying themselves as designer, who work within the larger field. Christine, you talked about working with people outside of the design field, sort of broaden your field so that you're a designer working with policymakers, organizers, skateboarders, grandmas, knitting groups, gardeners. Just really understand that more and more you try to sort of name yourself, less and less effective and less likely that you'll find the answer to, well, what is beyond do-gooderism that I'm interested in?
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not looking for a comprehensive answer, but if anybody could add anything before I turn it over to the audience, I would love to hear. Durell has his mic. Go.
Let me think about this. So my company, we're focused, our mission is to eliminate multi-generational poverty in America. And I think it's possible. To do that work, we work directly with community in Black, brown, low-income communities across the country. To be a designer in that work, you have to be able to go in and have conversations with folks, build rapport, build relationship with people in Black, brown, and low-income communities across America. When I think about someone who's just starting off, people frequently come to me and say, I want to work for your company. And I ask them, like, well, what work have you done in these spaces, right? Who have you talked to? Tell me about a time where you had these conversations where you led a group of Black folks or brown folks or non-centered folks in our society generally, right, in a conversation. Have you done that before? Have you had those interactions? Have you had those engagements? Especially after 2020, there were a lot of folks after that summer with COVID and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and there were a lot of people who were like, I've been doing this other type of design at these other firms for a really long time, and I want to make the jump. And I gave the same advice over and over. I said, I will not send people into a community to have conversations, to build trust, to deal with issues around trauma, who have never had conversations with these people before. There's a level of sort of getting used to it, proximity, relationship building that is important, and you can gain that through a number of other ways. And you can also demonstrate your commitment to that by going and you find organizations that are doing that work right now. And it might be that you're someone who's a server to start with. You're serving food, you're serving meals, you have casual conversations to start with. Maybe after that you go and you volunteer on a more ongoing basis, and maybe you offer some design services for free, et cetera. But you build a portfolio that says, no, I'm here doing this work because it really matters to me. Like, I can tell you why it matters. I can tell you the stories of the people that I've talked to who live with challenges that middle class and upper class America are not dealing with, and it bothers me, right? When I hear that in someone, I'm like, okay, this is a conversation we can keep moving forward with. And you can tell me about the people you've spoken with in that regard. But I think there's just an element of needing to get your feet wet and take that initiative to develop some of those relationships that I would say is a move for any young designer who wants to go into this work.
Helen, I just remembered one more thing.
Okay.
What Durell was saying reminded me that I have another idea, is that one good way of sort of embedding yourself or like building the trust pretty quickly, is to consider working within a government structure. So I myself work for New York City Housing Authority, City of Newark, and working within the government is really hard work, but it forces you to be part of that fabric where democracy meets built environment, or you're forced to consider all these decisions that we made collectively to build our cities together, So don't stay in government agencies too long. You'll lose your hair, but consider doing it. And if you're going into government agencies, finding the right setup is really important. So please feel free to reach out to anyone like me who's done it and still kept a lot of hair. So that's something that what you were saying was reminding me of.
Thank you. Jason says I only have 5 minutes. We only have 5 minutes. They don't know, but we're actually going to go over. Because I want to make sure that we have time for questions. And I actually can't see anyone, but I see hands. So I don't know where there are mics traveling. This person has their person has the mic. So if you have a question, raise your hand. Don't be shy.
Yeah. We haven't been able to see you the whole time.
Yeah. It's been great for me.
Yeah.
All those eyeballs on us.
Are they even out there?
Thank you so much for the conversation. I'm a PhD researcher at the Ohio State University who is studying about community design and community design center. And I always want to contribute to this community design and community design center work by doing some more research and making some more knowledge related to the community engagement work in design and planning field. And given your experience in community design or community engaged design and planning work, what kinds of research or knowledge would be helpful for enhancing your community engaged work or other related work that you are currently working on? So I'm wondering what kinds of research would be interesting for practitioners' perspective.
Yeah, so I believe the question was, from the practitioner side, what kind of research does this person who's a PhD, what kind of research would be helpful for us as practitioners? And I'll just open it up.
I mean, I'll say one thing that comes to mind is it's so hard, especially like when you're doing grant-funded work, to have a lot of like evaluation capacity. And so like any research work that helps to support like collecting information around the impacts of the work that we're all doing is always beneficial. And I think also looking especially at, and this is like a whole other level, but also looking at like collective impact of the work across, you know, all the different works that we're all doing. I think those are things that are really valuable and that help tell the story and help build the field and continue to gain support for it.
Yeah.
I think it's a difficult thing to research, honestly, because community engagement is so tactile and you have to be in it to know it. You have to have like dealt with the difficult conversations and facilitated, several people that have opposing viewpoints to really understand what the dynamics of it are. I feel like it's a little bit hard to do as more of a research project, but that's just my opinion on it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You know, actually, that question just reminds me. The single person who did not accept my invitation is a woman named Anna Goodman out of Oregon, and she actually does this research. I'm calling her out. Maybe she'll see this. Who has another question?
Don't say no to Alan. He'll come for you.
There's one up here. And how about you introduce yourself? I'd appreciate it.
Hey everybody, my name's Andrew. I'm volunteering with this conference. Yeah.
Thank you.
And my question is, what is the most major assumption you've had challenged as a facilitator, and how did that challenge reshape your work going forwards?
That's a great question. I mean, we all come in with sort of assumptions about what we're doing, right? And as we facilitate or lead conversations or work with communities, those are often challenged. Can you guys speak to that a little bit?
Can you give an example of a facilitating role that you have played?
Ooh.
So that, I mean, because there's so many, so I just want to cater my answer to you.
First thing that comes to mind, or I'm based in LA, so I've done, my experience in community design has been working with an organization in an unincorporated, predominantly Latino community. And I think just like assumptions about this community, it like lies at the busiest like interchange in LA. It's one of those like spaghetti highway junctions. And I think something that I learned in like my time there in terms of facilitation is really like understanding, like, despite it's like very car oriented, this community, it's LA also, there's a lot of like intergenerational pride in that community and a lot of pride in like the infrastructure, even though I guess from like an outside, like my background's kind of in urban design is complicated. From an outside perspective, it's like not really too walkable, but there's a lot of pride in the place and space. Does that help clarify?
Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of like assuming that the constituencies that you're trying to engage have a similar set of goals as you, because we're all in the sort of lefty, spaces, and so we have similar political or like similar policy interests. I guess towards that, for me, is that, I mean, a lot of times we go into saying like, we have to build trust. We have to build trust, and it's so true. But people trusting me has nothing to do with the success of their community. In other words, as a facilitator, you're there to understand everyone's need, like why in the world they're in that meeting anyway, what it is that they're trying to get out of this initiative, and that the key to this meeting is coalition building, and not necessarily about like, oh, we're gonna trust you really care for this community. Like, no, I will make sure that your talking points get to the council member. In other words, as a facilitator, to go into the meeting and really understanding everyone's BATNA, which is a term that I really like when we sort of facilitate negotiation, which is best alternative to non-agreement, is a key. So I think I've struggled in the past to sort of assume, oh, everyone is going to trust me and like understand that I will bring everyone together because I'm the facilitator, like how can I be harmful? I'm just an Asian girl. To someone who, does the research, what everyone is coming to the table with, what are the hard negotiating facts that they're not going to let go of, and just being really aware of where individuals are coming from and what they're trying to get. BATNA is a good term.
I also want to acknowledge that the way that Jae just facilitated that question was brilliant, because it was a difficult question, and then she asked the gentleman to talk more about what he meant by that and explain it in a way that really kind of got to the core issue, which then allowed our facilitator to make the response. So that was a great example.
So thank you. Last question. All questions are good, so who's really excited to give us the last one? Jason, good to see. I'm just calling on you. Oh, I saw you before. I can hear you too if you don't want to wait for the mic.
I think something that I've learned the most from the past is around failures, and so I'm just curious if you want to talk about an instance where you experienced failure and maybe decide to push that or how you learned from that.
I mean, I've failed too many times, so you guys. Oh yeah, sorry. The question from Jason was, can we speak about the failures that we've experienced in community design and perhaps implied what we've learned from them?
The first company I started, the wind turbine company, it failed. And I think the lesson for that was it's not enough to design something that works well for the individual that you're designing for. And I can give you actually several other examples of projects where the end user benefits or could benefit. We also have to organize our designs within the world as the world exists. Like the world exists a certain way right now. There's a reality around us. And if we want to make progress from where we are, it might be getting to a new reality, a new framework, a new outcome. But we have to start where the world is. And so I started a company that was meant to affect and benefit people all around the country. There's 1.7 billion people who don't have access to electricity in the world. And it failed because I didn't know how to build a business. I didn't know anything about, I'd never sold a product before. I'd never built a website before. I'd never had anyone purchase anything from me who didn't know me, I guess. I didn't know how to reach people. I didn't know anything. And after it failed, I had a very long conversation with myself, which is where I got my very discrete list of things I didn't know from. And I went back to the drawing board of the very basics to figure it out. And so, a lot of the path for my current company has been, how do you build something that is sustainable where you can pay people well for their expertise to hold on to their talent because they do have decisions to make while creating impact in the lives of real people. So failure can be a huge benefit as well, but I think that would be a big takeaway is like, as you design, we call it multi-stakeholder design, it has to live in harmony with the ecosystem as the world exists now in order for it to last as well.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything to add before we wrap? The answer can be no, it's okay. Okay, well, I'm gonna hold it there.
Can we give a round of applause to Alan?
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I'm still just so grateful that you all came to Chicago and agreed to do this. So thank you very much. I hope we can all get drinks or coffee or something to eat. I know you're going to Ohio, Adam, so you'll be missed. But really, one thing that I try to be clear is like, in my experience here, I've realized how giving everyone here can be, how generous everyone here can be. So if reach out is by email, if reach out is by just like a tap on the shoulder, do it. I actually don't like being poked, so don't tap me. But I'm here today, we're here tomorrow, and I'm really excited for this conference. And thank you for all of your ears as I ramble.